Mark, and good morning, everyone. And first of all, thank you all for being here. It is so heartwarming to see such a big crowd here on this very, very important day as we honor those who stood with us that day and those who stand among us today as we reflect on the tragic events that took place 18 years ago. First of all, please join me in acknowledging those in uniform here today, our first responders who work to protect us all each and every day, and our military members who protect our country, our freedoms, our values as a nation. We honor each one of you today and thank you for the selfless service that you provide to our community. Your fallen brothers and sisters are heroic. Their work was nothing short of heroic on that tragic day. We will never forget the events of September 11th, 2001. We will never forget the sights, the sounds, the devastating reality that shook us to our core. But it's impossible to picture those tragic moments without also remembering the many pillars of courage, the brave men and women on the front lines, charging into unknown territory to protect and to rescue their fellow citizens. Every single one of us, young and old, is living the effects of those events that day. For you young people, maybe it was your parents or family members who participated in the disaster relief crews who left Erie County and counties all over this country to assist with relief, recovery, and rebuilding on site. Maybe your loved one promptly and purposefully enlisted in the United States Armed Forces. Maybe your friends or family fulfilled the selfless roles of police, sheriff, firefighter, paramedic, aid workers, or civic volunteer. It's important for all of us to continue to hear about and understand that day, September 11th, and what it means to all of us as a nation. It changed us as a nation, and it changed us as individuals. The first responders and those still responding today exemplify servant leadership. There was a call for help, there was a need, and those heroes answered. We must also focus on the many, many heroes of September 11th because they epitomize the American spirit. Their demonstration of human kindness, courage, and decency sets an example for all of us to exemplify. We as a nation, we as a people have a responsibility to embody this standard. We have a responsibility to honor their sacrifice that day and the day since then, to share our stories from that day with generations to come. We have a responsibility to come together as Americans and assist our fellow citizens, most particularly in their greatest moment of need. Every one of us here today is obligated to build and protect a safe Erie County. We must stand united in prayer for our community and for our nation. Even the tiniest of acts can make a huge difference in someone's life. So I ask you to ask yourself, how can we all do better? How can we be better? If heroes can emerge in the face of terror like they did 18 years ago, what is stopping each one of us from doing that in a smaller way? This memorial represents the courage and sacrifice our fellow Americans had on September 11th, 2001. Let us strive today and every day to serve as a physical reminder of our commitment to being everyday heroes. May God continue to bless Erie County and continue to bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Father Jerry.
Thank you, Mark. Let us bow our heads in prayer. God, our Creator, we turn to you on this sorrowful day as we commemorate the national tragedy of September 11th, 2001, and all who lost their lives at Ground Zero, the World Trade Center in New York City, at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and at Shanksville, Pennsylvania, as a result of acts of terrorism by foreign enemies against our nation, our democracy, and the principles of freedom and love for which we stand. We give you thanks for this 9/11 memorial and all who made it possible for us to have this special place to gather and this special commemoration to remember, so that we would never forget the great sacrifice that was made on that day by all those who lost their lives, and the great acts of patriotism that rallied our nation to come together and to respond with acts of prayer, courage, and kindness, and love, and hope, and unity. In spite of the horror and tragedy of 9/11, people of our nation and our state and our county and our city remain united together on this day and throughout the year. Our presence here today in solidarity with those attending prayer services across our nation on this day serves as a true symbol of freedom, a beacon of light, a ray of hope, a shelter of peace, a commitment to compassion and justice for all. Give our people the strength we need to overcome this senseless act of violence and evil and suffering. We offer our prayers on behalf of our country and our government leaders and members of the judiciary, our public officials and institutions, our soldiers and citizens, upon all who toil for the good of our country, to preserve democracy in our land, to advocate for peaceful resolutions between adversaries, and to treat every human life as infinitely worthy and dignified by virtue of being created in the divine image. As we look back and recall where we were, who was with us, and how we felt on that fateful day, may those vivid memories bring us a greater appreciation of what it means to be an American living in the United States of America. May the many images of firefighters, police officers, members of law enforcement, members of the National Guard and branches of the military, doctors and nurses and other healthcare providers, pastors, office workers, pilots, passengers, and ordinary citizens inspire us to see that love and service to humanity always has the last word, even when a national tragedy like 9/11 happens. As the two steel crossbeams that were found in the form of a cross starkly remind us, in the midst of human suffering, our God is there to provide comfort and relief, to save us in the midst of senseless acts of destruction caused by others who seek to do us harm. As we consider that fall day in September, on this 18th anniversary of that horrific day in our nation's history, we pray we will never have to experience such suffering ever again. In the midst of all that suffering, help us to give due honor and respect to all the examples of goodness that emerged, with strangers banding together to prevent more carnage, people lining up to donate blood, church congregations opening their doors to offer comfort and care for anyone and everyone, people extending a helping hand to assist and help those they knew and those they never met. May all the good that emerged from the hearts of a caring people be the wave that reverberates throughout our history, revealing divine power to bring redemption, reconciliation, and resurrection. We ask you, God, to bring continued healing to those who, because of their presence in those places on that day, suffer from injuries and illnesses. Heal the pain of still grieving families and all who lost loved ones. Give them the strength to continue living their lives, looking forward to a brighter future. We are grateful for the new life born since the attacks, for those beloved children and students who don't remember that day. Most of all, God of peace, bring an end to violence in our world. Instill peace in the hearts of all men, women, and children, along with peace among all nations on earth. Turn the hearts and minds of those filled with hatred into hearts and minds filled with love for humanity. As we are oftentimes overwhelmed by the great magnitude of this tragedy, we seek your light and your guidance to keep such terrible events from ever occurring again. May all those whose lives were spared live their lives in such a manner that the lives lost in New York City, in Washington, D.C., and at the Pentagon and Shanksville, Pennsylvania, that they may not have been lost in vain. May this sacred, blessed memorial remain forever etched in our minds, our hearts, and our spirits, and for future generations, with the solemn promise we will never forget, as a nation, a state, a county, and a city. We will always remember. We pray this in your name, Almighty God. Amen.
My name's Tom Kalinowski. I'm the pipe maker and president of Erie County Pipes and Drums. And we're happy to be here here to support this ceremony this morning. It's hard to believe it's been 18 years ago. I can remember exactly what I was doing and where I was at that day. Like it'll never leave. This morning I had a chance to watch the news, and they were getting ready to start the ceremony, and they had the flag that was there, and the New York City Fire Department and Police Department pipe band was there. And everybody always asks us, why are the pipe bands and bagpipes so significant with the fire department and the police department? Well, if you think about the immigrants that came over to this country back in the early 1800s and even up until World War I, they were Irish and Scottish and English individuals, and they were hardworking people. And they liked to sing and they liked to play. When they came to this country, guess what jobs they took? The jobs that didn't pay anything and the most dangerous jobs in the city. And that was the fire department and police department. They had horses, they had carts, and they had buckets of water. They had no guns. They didn't need any. They were just trying to police and make sure somebody wasn't robbing some of the grain or some of the alcohol that they were making illegally. So it was a very difficult, it was true. My grandfather told me that. And you know, the police department, fire department, our heroes. So anyway, while they were here, they took those jobs and they lived in the fire department and they lived in the police department because that was their shifts. Well, a lot of them played musical instruments, and the bagpipes were one of them. They brought those over from the old country. So it became a legend with them to support the communities by marching in parades and doing events such as funerals or memorial services for the community. And today, when you see a lot of the police departments, they call it the Emerald Society, which is the fire department, pipe band in New York City, Chicago, Philadelphia, all the major cities have it. So we try to carry on a tradition here at Erie with our pipe band and support especially the first responders. And being a 24-year Army veteran that I am, it's close to my heart to make sure that we support everything that we can do for the community, because it's very important. And you youngsters, I know you weren't around 18 years ago, but it's something that you don't want to forget, because it's the first time that anybody has really ever attacked our country. And it still hurts to this day for most of us that remember that day. So that's pretty much it, the nuts and bolts of why we play the bagpipes and why we do the things we do. And if anybody's interested in joining us, we'd love to have you, and we get out there and support the community, especially the first responders and our military. Thank you.
One of the lessons that the country learned from the 9/11 attacks was that even in a moment of great tragedy, even in a moment of great difficulty, people were able to come together as Americans. When we were challenged, when we were assaulted, we were able to turn to each other and ask for help. And the fact that we were able to do that, we were able to come together, is one of the greatest testaments to what it means to be an American. When historians look back, what they're going to see is that there was a generation that emerged that volunteered to be of service in some of the most difficult and dangerous environments we'd ever been presented with. This was a generation that really worked with the courage of perseverance. We have to live for something larger than ourselves. We all have to find a way in our own lives to be of service to others around us. And when we do that, we become stronger and we build a stronger country together.
Next speaker is Attorney Tim Wachter.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to the committee members who have dedicated themselves to preserving and honoring the memory of what occurred on September 11th, 18 years ago. On September 8th of 2001, I got married to my high school sweetheart here in Erie. At that time, I was working as an advance representative for Pennsylvania's Governor Tom Ridge and as a member of the Pennsylvania advance team for President George W. Bush. I was responsible for handling on-the-road logistics for the governor, arranging for and managing his official events. For the White House, I would do something similar, but on a larger scale, serving as a site advance team member, managing the planning, logistics, and building out of sites and events that the president would later visit while he was in Pennsylvania. On September 11th, my wife and I were on our honeymoon. And like most of the world, we were in shock, horrified by the images on the television from New York City, Washington, D.C., and ultimately Shanksville, Pennsylvania. We returned home, taking what we were told was one of the first international flights allowed back into the country on September 16th. I returned to the office the next day and began planning the governor's visit to the Flight 93 crash site in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. This wasn't the first time he had visited the site, having been helicoptered out by the Pennsylvania National Guard on September 11th. But this was to be the official briefing and tour offered by the FBI. On the morning of the 20th, I traveled from Harrisburg to Shanksville. The scene was still controlled by the FBI as the site of an active terror investigation. I was granted access by the FBI, was given a briefing and a tour by an agent. What I learned and what I saw was unreal and has been imprinted on my very being. The darkened scars in the earth were still plainly visible 9 days after the attack. I clearly saw, I still see in my mind's eye, the trough cut into the ground where Flight 93's wings scoured the earth before tipping and impacting the ground. By the time I had arrived, much of the impact site had been excavated, with the surviving pieces of the wreckage piled around the edge of the crater. But what has stuck with me to this day was that the plane crashed at the edge of a line of hemlocks, and the forward momentum of the explosion had sheared the trees off at an approximate 45-degree angle. Later, we would learn that the blast also sent human remains into the growth hemlocks. Out of respect for the victims and to preserve the sanctity of the site, the trees were later cut down, chipped, and used to fill the crater and create a final resting place for the victims of Flight 93. You can view that site today at the National Flight 93 Memorial, and I encourage you to do so. Much like this hallowed ground, Erie's own September 11th Memorial, the Flight 93 National Memorial in Shanksville preserves our collective history, pays tribute to the victims, and reminds us to treasure the freedoms that we, as Americans, often take for granted. Governor Ridge never showed up for the briefing that day. He had been delayed at a meeting in Washington. I ended up facilitating the tour of the crash site for the Adjutant General of the Pennsylvania National Guard, Major General William Lynch, for Robert Mueller, the then director of the FBI, and John Ashcroft, who is the United States Attorney General. Later that night, President Bush gave an address to the joint session of Congress, in which he appointed Pennsylvania's governor and Erie's own Tom Ridge as the first director of Homeland Security. During that address, the president described the state of the nation as strong, stating, "In the course of normal events, presidents come to this chamber to report on the State of the Union. Tonight, no such report is needed. It has already been delivered by the American people. We have seen it in the courage of the passengers who rushed terrorists to save others on the ground. Passengers like an exceptional man named Todd Beamer, one whom we memorialize behind me. We have seen the State of the Union in the endurance of our rescuers, working past exhaustion. We have seen the unfurling of flags, the lighting of candles, the giving of blood, and the saying of prayers in English, Hebrew, and Arabic. We have seen the decency of a loving and giving people who have made the grief of strangers their own. Today, we are asked to consider the legacy of September 11th, 2001. The legacy of September 11th is September 12th. As a nation, as a people, whether Christian, Islamic, Muslim, Jew, or non-believer, Republican or Democrat, we are Americans first. We recognize that God, family, and country were more important than anything else, and that our freedoms and our way of life were under attack. The legacy of September 11th is that partisan bickering and political infighting, while often dominating the news, do not define us. The bravery and heroism of the passengers of Flight 93, the selflessness of the first responders in New York City and throughout the nation, that defines us. but also September 12th defines us, as does December 8th, 1941. It is the American response to tragedy, our collective ability to put aside petty differences and to focus on our collective human condition. The legacy of 9/11 is to preserve our uniquely American experience and the dignity of human life, all human life, at all costs. September 11th steeled our ability to grieve as a nation, to fight for the justice for the victims, and strengthened our resolve to rise from the ashes of the tragedy, to persevere as a stronger people and a stronger nation. September 11th has left an indelible mark on the United States of America. To preserve the legacy of that fateful day, we must remember that our American life is unique. And while it is not perfect, it preserves freedoms that our Declaration of Independence declares to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The legacy of September 11th, 2001 is the legacy of our nation. As a country, the United States of America was founded on the basis of preserving the unalienable rights of all men and women. 225 years later, after the signing of the Declaration of Independence on September 11th, 2001, we were reminded of how radical a concept that is, and how important it is that we continue to strive to form a more perfect union. Thank you.
Right after 9/11 happened, I was at a memorial service for another friend who died, and there was a fireman who had just come from St. Patrick's Cathedral for a service for one of his fellow firefighters. Saw me, came over, and he said, "Mr. Proka, you watch my generation now. You know, we're going to become the next greatest generation."
We've had sons and daughters of firefighters who enlisted, have gone to the academies and gone and fought for the country.
They've enlisted in the military. They were called out of a sense of patriotism. I've met recently some Army Rangers who are on their 10th tour in Afghanistan. Stop and think about it. In Vietnam, you served 1 year and you came home.
I speak a lot around the country, and I run into people come up to me and say, "I enlisted, because of what happened to your guys that day." And it's an emotional experience. It makes you feel proud of what your guys did.
This is for the generations who are alive. They're Pearl Harbor. This is a time they'll remember for the rest of their lives.
A very fitting audio clip for our next speaker, Jay Brenneman.
"18 years. 18 years ago, I was 18 years old. At the age of 18, I had a lot of ideas of who I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. But like many 18-year-olds, I had trouble narrowing it down, mainly because I didn't have the resources, education, experience, or connections to take any particular path in life. For me, 9/11 didn't start out like the days before it. I worked second shift, 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. at a warehouse, putting in 12-hour days, 7 days a week. I had recently moved into my own place and still had not fully unpacked my things. For whatever reason, I woke up early that day, having had only a few hours of sleep. I set up my 13-inch TV and sat down with a bowl of cereal to watch the only channel that I could get over the rabbit ear antennas. I watched in disbelief as NBC's Today Show was interrupted by the first plane crash into the World Trade Center's North Tower. Because my TV reception was so fuzzy and because it seemed too terrible to be a sleep-deprived misunderstanding, I rushed across the street to a friend's house, where we tuned in and watched the rest of the horrors unfold. At that moment, and for the hours that followed, I felt a sense of helplessness. I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what that something was. I wanted to drive to New York City, Washington, D.C., or Pennsylvania and do something, anything. If someone had come on the TV, the radio, wrote in the newspaper, or even had someone come to my door and told me, "Go here, do this," I would have done it. I felt that I had to give of myself somehow, some way, in service to our country. I know for a fact that I'm not the only one here who felt that same way. Some of you made that trip, and some of your colleagues, friends, family did the same, and are sadly no longer here with us or are still facing the health impacts. That day while at work, the warehouse was uncharacteristically quiet. That silence was eventually broken when one of my coworkers, a retired Marine, advised me to join the military because our country needed me, he said, and because he believed I'd be good at it. That is the something that I had been looking for, to put myself in service to our nation, wear the uniform, and let our country decide where it needed me. Giving all of yourself in service to others often requires giving up the ability to control when or how you are needed. But that is what makes selfless service the unique value that it is. You train and train some more. You give up your time and comfort just in case the moment arises that you can help a perfect stranger. But it wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. I had no high school diploma, and the Army had a limit to the number of enlistees it would accept who had a GED. I didn't let that stop me because I had a mission and a clear path to take. After months of taking the required courses, I passed my GED and ASVAB tests and set off on a military career that would last 2 enlistments, 5 promotions, 3.5 tours overseas, 2 combat deployments, and experiences that set the tone for the rest of my life, good and bad. I lost friends. I've been in the middle of gunfire and had mortars and bombs go off around me. But what I think about daily is the sacrifice so many others freely gave, regardless of what town they came from, how much money their family had, what their talents were, or what they believed in. What mattered is we were all there, together, in uniform, willing and ready to answer our nation's call, always mindful that our mission involved putting the well-being of others before our own. During my last deployment in Iraq, I made a career choice that furthered that mission of service. My wife and I, herself an Erie native, made our home here and started a family. I went to college to study social work and quickly found plenty of opportunities to serve our community, both as a profession and as a hobby. As was the case in the military, I never found myself alone in serving others. I never had any trouble finding ways to serve in nearly every place I looked: our church, our neighborhood, our children's school, arm in arm with other veterans, and now with an amazing group of men and women at the Bell Valley Fire Department. From food and clothing drives to neighborhood cleanups, park improvements, home repair, both short and long-term community initiatives, and more recently as a volunteer firefighter, I've never had any difficulty finding something to do or someone to help. If anything, there are more opportunities to serve our community than there are hours in the day. All you have to do is make yourself available, and the chances to serve will quickly fill your calendar. 18 years later, I no longer ask myself who I want to be or what I want to do, because I know with clarity and certainty that the answer to every question or concern is to serve others. The last 18 years have been written and cannot be changed, but as you look forward to your future in the next 18 years, know this: while the memorials will still stand and the memories of the world before such tragedies become distant, the future has yet to be written with your good deeds. What you do from this day forward in service to others, even complete strangers, will shape the lives of our community and our country for generations to come. If there is a hurdle for you to jump, jump it. If you have to give up your time and comfort, give it up. If you are not sure what path of service is best for you, try them all. If you cannot serve our country, then serve our community. If you don't know anyone, introduce yourself. If you are facing uncertainty, embrace it. If you have children, bring them along. If no one had asked for your help, I am asking you now. If no one has challenged you to serve others, I am challenging you. Certainty, clarity, and expertise will come later, but friendships and everlasting bonds of service will be forged with time. The next 18 years are yours to be written, and our community and our country are counting on you to write it. Thank you.
Erie Chief Santone.
Good morning. For those of you that have flags, please join me in planting this flag into the ground so that we will never, ever forget 9/11.
The problem that came up was that our society began to look at the responders in terms of their disease. They became an issue in terms of their liability. And my feeling was that that's not who the responders were. Let's find out who they are as human beings, what their motivation was, what values they had, what sacrifices they made, how they were able to renew themselves. It was almost like taking a civics class as to what is important about being a citizen. What is important?
No one could possibly know 9/11 the way these people do. We asked several of the responders to give us a sense of the hours of testimony that they've put into Dr. Love's project.
The debris and the people rushing out at us, I couldn't even make it to Tower 1. I made it to the base of Tower 2. This big, brawly FBI guy had his shield around his neck. And I looked up at him, and he's telling there's about 6 officers there with me. And he's like, if you want to live, you might as well leave now. He said, we're all going to die. I'm like, we can't leave. I'm not leaving. And the officers that I were there with, we're not leaving either. And we continued to evacuate and do our jobs, but, we were all like, wow, we're going to die,
More than 6,000 responders enrolled in his World Trade Center health program. One study shows that nearly a third of those who worked at Ground Zero have asthma. 42% suffer with sinusitis. Nearly 40% have gastroesophageal reflux disease, known as GERD. And many have reactive airways dysfunction syndrome that the patients just call RADS. Luft listened to their stories in the examining room for 8 years when he realized that his patients were the authors of one of the most dramatic chapters of American history.
The building imploded down. It blew me out of the building. And I was able to hold on to the doorway with my left arm.
Who are these people?
So of course we have the firemen and the policemen and the EMS workers. And then we have the volunteer firemen. And then you have the iron workers and the construction workers and the laborers. On 9/11, all Americans responded from all walks of life.
I was a senior in high school. I realized that I had to go down there. I don't know how I'm gonna help. I don't know what I can do.
My whole family is cops. I'm the 13th in my family to be a New York City police officer.
I am a licensed massage therapist. I just felt like I had to be down there helping these people, knowing what I do for a living can help these people.
Like this, and those of us who wear uniforms make a living out of the worst 10 minutes of everybody's lives. 9/11 was a hell of a lot longer than 10 minutes long. Post-traumatic stress is something that I have an issue with. Spent a month after being caught in the collapse, waking up on the floor, trying to feel my way out of my own bedroom. That went on for over a month.
This is Tyree Bacon in the Oral History Project, remembering a woman who grabbed him by the shirt as one of the towers fell.
I told her, I said, sweetheart, don't worry, I promise we're getting out of here. Well, I flat out lied to her. I thought we were gonna die where we were. If I didn't have her, I probably would have curled up in the fetal position and just waited to die.
These men and women to the left and right of me and behind me, they're the best of the best of what America offered 10 years ago. We can't change history. And through their eyes, they're telling America what they've seen, what they did, and what they're going through 10 years later. And that is priceless.
One thing I want to say, the real heroes out of this stuff are dead.
Thank you, absolutely.
They're not here. Nobody here is a hero. We just did what everybody else did. The true heroes are people who went into those buildings and they never made it out.
The toxic cloud and deadly dust of September 11, 2001 is still impacting first responders today. More and more heroes are being laid to rest after years of suffering from post-9/11 illnesses. Father Brian Jordan, a Manhattan priest and first responder himself, says the worst is yet to come.
For the next 5 years, it's predicted, and I believe that it will be an accurate prediction. 5 years, more people died from toxins due to exposure at 9/11 than those who died the actual day.
Since the 2001 attack, about 10,000 first responders and victims have been diagnosed with cancer, and at least 2,000 deaths are attributed to 9/11 related illnesses. The risk of some cancers among first responders is 30% higher than the general population. Father Jordan says he's presided at least 20 funerals so far.
It's very sad to see them sort of deteriorate, gradually throughout the years, and it's very painful.
Father Jordan spent 9 months in Lower Manhattan, consoling first responders and their families. He says to his knowledge, he hasn't been affected by the toxins.
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised. Many others have, and I guess I was spared.
Others, like John Field, haven't been so lucky. He's one of many first responders who appeared before Congress, fighting to get funding for the 9/11 compensation fund.
These men and women, uniform and non-uniform, the children of Lower Manhattan, are sick and dying, and their families being left in financial ruin.
We're all the people of God, and we're all fragile, we're all vulnerable, and realize that we're human beings. We're not robots, we're not machines, and we have to have care and concern, showing charity and love to them. Will make all the difference in the world for those who are suffering at the present time.
We thought we were going to just end up getting left out in the cold, essentially. There were thousands of us. There were 20,000 public school students in the area.
Lila Nordstrom testified before Congress about the young people impacted by ground zero toxins. Lila has suffered from severe asthma and digestive issues. Many of us were more familiar with NYPD Detective Luis Alvarez,
the day before my 69th round of chemo,
who died less than a month after his moving June 11th appearance before the Judiciary Committee. Lila, who was a senior at Stuyvesant High School on 9/11, has attended funerals too.
We had a classmate who recently just passed away of a gastric cancer. When you are 35 and already know 5 people with lymphoma, you start to feel like maybe the numbers are a little bit higher than they should be.
Studies on first responders found rates of Hodgkin's lymphoma are more than 50% higher in their group than the general population. There hasn't been quite the same focus on the millennials.
Students at Stuyvesant were here for 8 months of the cleanup.
Who returned to school within a month of 9/11. A barge docked right next to school, constantly refilled with toxic debris.
Our school vents weren't cleaned until the next summer.
Dr. Michael Crane monitors World Trade Center health at Mount Sinai Hospital. He knows the latency period before cancers show up can be more than 2 decades.
20, 25, 30, 40 years after the exposure.
And while Lila is relieved the Zadroga Act has been extended until 2090, ensuring medical treatment, she worries about what lies ahead.
We have classmates who have had breast cancers, thyroid cancers, very rare bone cancers.
Today, the responders got what they deserved.
The House and Senate both voted to extend the Zadroga 9/11 Health and Compensation Act, giving health care coverage to those afflicted with ground zeroization of the Zadroga Act. Means that first responders and others who suffered from lingering effects from the 9/11 attacks have funding for the health care they need. First responders made hundreds of trips to the Capitol to guilt Congress into doing its job. Television host Jon Stewart also went to Congress multiple times on behalf of those affected. The act is named for New York City Police Detective James Zadroga. 9/11. His father Joseph Zadroga said, "It's a very good day." Senator Kirsten Gillibrand said, "The Daily News memorializing and covering this, really speaking truth to power and shaming people who needed to be."
We'll never again have to come to Washington to beg for basic health care.
The legacy of 9/11.